The Honourable David Park.
We had 10 minutes from the Minister of Finance and he didn't talk about his own record or his own government's policies once. Not once. Not once. This is a government that has unemployment at a 13-year high, over 7%, the highest since when he was last Minister of Finance, a government that has created no extra jobs over the last year, a government with the worst growth record in 50 years, where the real economy of manufacturing and exports outside the primary sector is shrinking and continuing to shrink, where the current account deficit last year was $10 billion and this year is forecast to be worse in the developed world, where the Crown revenue forecast for the 5-year period has dropped $13 billion in the last year, and where the overvalued dollar is crippling our exporters. Now, I would have expected the Minister of Finance to address those issues rather than misrepresenting Labor housing policy, rather than misrepresenting the numbers we've used, and rather than claiming credit for the insulation of state houses, which was funded by a Labor government under a Green Party initiative that was promoted by Jeanette Fitzsimons. And I recall, because I was there and I was part of that cabinet that approved that bid by the Greens. Mr. Speaker, that continued on from what we had yesterday from Mr. Key. Mr. Key stood up, and I'm going to quote what he started with. He said, "What a good, strong start it's been for National-led government, has it not?" Self-praise. What a cracker of a start, full of energy and full of new ideas. Ready here to continue the 4 years of solid work and progress we've seen in the past. It's not even February. We've had a cabinet reshuffle. And then he lists the new initiatives. And he only listed 2. He said 14,000 new apprenticeships to be hired over the next 5 years, which won't even make up for the loss. And what was the next thing? What was the next thing I was list? Exactly, warrant of fitnesses. The next big idea was warrant of fitness changes that will support every New Zealander around the country. What an embarrassment! What an embarrassment! You know, little wonder the biggest economic idea the government's got this 3-year cycle is selling off SOEs. And what's the latest news on that? Brian Fallow, New Zealand Herald, 24th of January. SOE sales folly without smelter sorted. He said he will no doubt, this is talking of the Prime Minister, when the Prime Minister outlines the government's plans for the year ahead, he will no doubt be clear that it's not going to shrink from doing something foolish just because it's so unpopular. It is foolish given that the price of power is uncertain because of TY point problems, and therefore not only will it make the Crown deficit worse, the price they're going to get suppressed. Mr. Speaker, if you were a serious government addressing New Zealand's problems, you would actually be doing something to address the problems of our exporters. The government doesn't like it. They blocked an inquiry at the Finance and Expenditure Committee into the shrinking exports outside the primary sector, and now they complain that they weren't invited to the one that's outside of that process. Talk about spin. Well, I'll tell you what. We've had over 130 substantive submissions from organisations and manufacturers. That's in addition to a far greater number of form submissions. That's 130 submissions of substance. We've had people like Hamilton Jet. Hamilton Jet came along to us, and I'll quote what's said about what they said by the Herald. Their heading in the Herald this week was CEOs slam killer dollar. Single monetary goal of targeting inflation is now past its use-by date. Keith Whiteley from Hamilton Jet came along. He said, Hamilton Jet, one of New Zealand's, they're one of our proudest export companies. They are dominant in the large marine jet market. They've got over 50% of the world market. Their closest competitor is Rolls-Royce, and they're better than them. At the moment, they need to invest $20 million to improve their productivity. At an exchange rate of 80 cents, and our exchange rate's currently more than that at about 83 cents. At an exchange rate of 80 cents, they would make a 2% return on that investment, despite the fact that they're debt-free. 2%. No wonder our exporters are not investing. No wonder our exporters are not expanding. Mr. Speaker, we heard similar things from others. We heard Stuart Hyde from Weimar Engineering. This again is a world-leading company that manufactures machines that wash vegetables before they're sold in supermarkets. It's a big market internationally. They're the world leader. What did they say? In recent years, because of the exchange rate, it's been forced to outsource 4/5 of its componentry from overseas. So it's exported 4/5 of those jobs. Exported, and it says that it's cost them 40 local jobs. This is one company alone, and the company now considering moving its final assembly overseas because this government won't do anything to change monetary policy. Mr. Speaker, the world has changed. I'm going to read you a couple of excerpts from what were in the Telegraph newspaper recently. A monetary revolution is underway. This is from the Telegraph on the 1st of January 2013. What's that?
It's good that you read the Telegraph.
I do read the Telegraph in respect of these issues because Ambrose Evans Pritchard has got a lot to teach the National Party, who are up to date. Not the National Party, the Telegraph. The IMF's up to date. They're saying the world's moved on. And this is how the article starts. The US, Japan, Britain, as well as the Swiss, the Scandies and a string of states around the world are effectively driving down their currencies or imposing caps. They're all doing it. And in New Zealand, we sit here like saps. We lose 180,000 people to Australia. The EPMU tells me that they've had redundancies every week in the last year in the exporters. And where are those people going for their next job? They're either going to Australia or they're moving into insecure jobs where they have insecure income from week to week in other service sector job outside of manufacturing. That's what we were told. We were told by CEO after CEO of export companies, the future lifeblood of this economy, that outside of primary processing, the situation of manufacturing is dire. One of the submitters said, the government says, the manufacturing performance index is improving. And then he pointed out that that's what happens when the weakest, the tail enders, fall off. That's not good news, he said. And this is what he did say. I thought it was a good metaphor. He says that's a bit like a cricket team improving their batting average by shooting the tail enders. That's not a sustainable solution, Mr. English. And why did you not, in one instance, address the fact that under the current government, the worst current account deficit in the world, $10 billion last year, more borrowing from overseas and more asset sales to foreigners. This government has no plan. This is why we're losing people to Australia. This is why wages aren't keeping pace with housing costs. And this is one of the issues that this government should be addressing. What did the manufacturers say they wanted? They said that they wanted changes to monetary policy first and foremost, which the government refuses to address despite the fact all these other countries have moved on. They say that they want the exemption for capital income removed. The exemption for capital income removed was the second thing on their list, a capital gains tax. Again, the government is ignoring the advice of the Treasury, of economists, of all the other countries in the world that want a neutral investment signal so that the money goes into productive enterprises instead of driving up the price of land. The government won't address that, and yet they pretend they want to do something about housing. Mr. Speaker, housing costs. The next thing on their list was they want a research and development tax credit. They don't want to be told by a government quango like IRL how to improve the efficiency of their business. In fact, they were horribly insulted by the likes of Mr. Joyce telling them they should be increasing their prices or becoming more efficient. They say that's their job, they're very good at it and they do, and despite the fact that they can't prosper, as Hamilton Jet example showed. We heard from A.W. Fraser, the biggest bronze manufacturers and turners in Australasia. Again, they can't make a quid. They said that Mr. Joyce says and Mr. Key says it's good that their new machinery is more expensive. They said they can't afford to buy it because when they use it, they can't turn a profit from what they sell because of the high dollar. The next thing on their list was also something that's in Labor Party policy, improved savings through universal KiwiSaver. Mr. Speaker, isn't it interesting that business is saying they need improvements to tax that Labor is promoting? They want changes to monetary policy that we have led.
What change have you proposed?
Well, we've proposed changes to the Act, changes to the membership of the board, to have the decisions taken by the board rather than the governor, and that macro-prudential tools should be able to be used for fiscal and economic outcomes, not just for stability of the financial system. So, Mr Speaker, these are substantial changes. The National Party is failing in its duties.
Mr Speaker.
The Honourable Chris Finlayson.
Mr Speaker, I want to begin by acknowledging your outstanding